After my son told me I was not invited to Christmas dinner because his wife wanted a private celebration with her real family. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I certainly did not beg. I simply started the engine of my 20-year-old pickup truck and drove away in silence. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the notification on my phone confirming an automatic transfer of $4,800 for his mortgage payment. I looked at the screen one last time and tapped cancel. 2 days passed in absolute silence, and then my phone lit up with 30 missed calls from him and his wife. I poured myself a glass of scotch, sat back in my recliner, and let it ring to 31. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone who actually pays the bills. It was December 15th, and the heater in my 2004 Ford F-150 was rattling like a dying lung. I sat parked in the driveway of the house I had bought 5 years ago, a sprawling $350,000 colonial on Oak Street that my son Brandon liked to call his estate. In my lap sat a small velvet box. Inside it rested a vintage Rolex Daytona, a watch I had bought at auction for $25,000, intending to give it to him as a legacy gift. A symbol that he was finally becoming the man I hoped he would be. I was early for our pre-Christmas lunch, but before I could unbuckle my seatbelt, my phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was Brandon. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice tight and rehearsed the way it always got when Vanessa was standing right next to him, directing the conversation. "Look, about Christmas this year, things have gotten a little complicated. Vanessa parents, Ted and Linda, are flying in from Florida last minute. And you know how Linda is about allergies." I glanced at the empty passenger seat where my golden retriever Buster usually sat. I had left the dog at the kennel, specifically for this trip, even though it cost me $300 because I knew Vanessa hated dog hair. I kept my voice even, you know. "Buster is at the kennel, Brandon." "I am alone, right?" "Right." "I know," Brandon stammered, and I could hear Vanessa whispering aggressively in the background. "Look, Dad, it is not just the dog. It is space. The house is going to be packed, and Vanessa really wants this year to be about the nuclear family. You know, just us and her parents intimate. We just think it would be better if we caught up with you after the holidays, maybe in January, the nuclear family." The phrase hung in the cold air of the truck cab. I looked up at the house. The house with the 4 bedrooms, the 3.5 baths, and the heated 3-car garage. The house that I paid the mortgage on every single month like clockwork because Brandon said his salary as a junior marketing associate needed time to grow. I looked at the wreath on the door, the one I had paid for last year, and I felt a strange calmness wash over me. It was the cold professional detachment of a man who spent 40 years as a chief financial officer, making hard decisions about failing assets. "So I am not part of the nuclear family?" I asked simply. "Dad, do not make this dramatic," Brandon said, his voice losing the guilt and gaining a defensive edge. "We just need space, we need privacy. You have your apartment downtown. You are fine, you do not need to be here making things awkward with Ted and Linda. They are very particular people. Particular people. I knew Ted and Linda Carter. They were the kind of people who ordered the most expensive wine at dinner and then forgot their wallets. They were the kind of people who judged my old truck and my flannel shirts without knowing that the company I retired from still paid me a consulting fee that dwarfed their combined life savings. But Brandon did not know that either. To him, I was just Doug, the old man with the pension and the pickup truck. "Okay," I said. I did not let my voice waver. I did not let him hear the crack in my chest where my heart used to be. "I understand perfectly, Brandon. You want privacy. You want a holiday with the people who matter. I will not bother you again." "Wait. Dad, are you mad?" Brandon asked, expecting me to fight. Expecting me to guilt-trip him so he could play the victim. "No." "Son," I said, looking at the velvet box in my lap. "I am not mad. I am just making adjustments. Enjoy your Christmas with the Carters. I hope they give you everything you deserve." I hung up before he could say another word. I looked at the house one last time, seeing the lights in the window, seeing the shadow of Vanessa moving in the kitchen, probably laughing about how easy it was to cut the old man out. I put the truck in reverse. The Rolex went into the glove compartment. I would not be needing it today. I had a more important errand to run. I did not drive back to my apartment. Instead, I drove straight to the downtown branch of First National Bank. The building was imposing with marble, pillars and gold lettering, the kind of place that intimidates people who live paycheck to paycheck. I parked my rusted truck right next to a shiny Mercedes, earning a glare from a man in a $3,000 suit. I ignored him. I adjusted my flannel shirt, grabbed my cane, and walked inside. The lobby was crowded with people cashing holiday checks, but I did not get in line. I walked straight to the glass door marked Private Wealth Management. The young receptionist looked up, ready to tell me I was in the wrong place, but then she saw my face. "Mr. Prentice," she said, standing up immediately. "We were not expecting you today." "Would you like coffee, Black?" I said, walking past her toward the corner office. "I need to see Mr. Henderson now." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from the branch manager, looking at a computer screen that displayed my financial life in cold, hard numbers. My accounts were not just healthy, they were substantial investments, real estate holdings and liquid assets that I had built over 40 years of 70-hour work weeks. But I was not there to check my stock portfolio. I was there for one specific line item. "The standing order for 24 Oak Street," I said, pointing a calloused finger at the screen. "The mortgage payment of $4,800 scheduled for the first of every month. Cancel it." Mr. Henderson blinked, looking from the screen to me. "Sir, that is the mortgage for your son house. You have paid that automatically for 5 years. If we cancel it now, the payment due on January 1st will bounce. The bank will send a default notice immediately. It could impact the credit score associated with the property." "I know how mortgages work," I said, my voice flat. I leaned forward. "The property is in Brandon, name correct. I just act as the guarantor and the payer." "That is correct, Mr. Prentice, but you have always covered it. You even cover the property taxes and the insurance." "Not anymore," I said. "Cancel the transfer. Cancel the insurance payment. Cancel the landscaping fee and the pool maintenance while you are at it. Effective immediately." Mr. Henderson typed on his keyboard, the sound of the keys echoing like gunshots in the quiet office. He paused, his hand hovering over the enter key. "Mr. Prentice, are you sure? This is going to cause a significant disruption. Your son will be liable for the full amount, plus late fees, if he does not pay within 15 days of the due date." I thought about the word disruption. I thought about Brandon standing in his kitchen telling me I was not family enough to eat turkey at his table. I thought about Vanessa rolling her eyes every time I walked into a room. I thought about the $4,800 leaving my account every month, like clockwork money that I had earned while missing my own vacations, while working through weekends, while building a future for a son who was ashamed of me, I am sure. I said, "Cut it off." Mr. Henderson pressed the key. "Done. The automatic transfer is canceled." "Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, standing up. "I want to transfer the $200,000 I had set aside in the liquid trust for his future grandchild. Move it to my personal travel fund. I think I am going to take a very long trip next year." I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than I had in a decade. The winter air hit my face, and for the first time it did not feel cold. It felt crisp. It felt like freedom. I got back into my truck and drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town. I ordered a burger and a beer and ate alone. It was the best meal I had had in years. I was no longer a donor. I was no longer a wallet. I was just Doug, and for the first time I was dangerous, because I had nothing left to lose. That evening, I returned to my apartment. It was a penthouse on the top floor of the city. Most exclusive building, but Brandon had never seen it. He thought I lived in the one-bedroom rental unit on the second floor. A decoy apartment I kept to maintain my humble appearance. I took the private elevator up to the 30th floor, where the floors were Italian marble and the view stretched all the way to the harbor. I poured myself a glass of 25-year-old scotch and sat in my leather armchair staring at the city lights below. I pulled out my iPad and opened Facebook. Against my better judgment, I needed to see it. I needed to confirm that I had made the right choice. There it was, a photo posted by Vanessa just an hour ago. The caption read, "Finally, a Christmas with people who have real class, blessed family goals." The photo was taken in the dining room of the Oak Street house, my dining room. The table was set with the fine china my late wife Beatrice had collected, piece by piece, over 30 years. Vanessa had demanded I give it to them as a wedding gift, saying it would be safe with her. And there, at the head of the table in the chair that I had sat in for every major holiday for the last 5 years, sat Ted Carter. Ted was wearing a suit that looked too tight, holding a glass of wine that I knew came from the cellar I had stocked. He was laughing, his face flushed and red, looking like a king holding court in a castle. He did not pay a dime for. Linda was next to him, wearing a necklace that looked suspiciously like the one Beatrice had left for her future granddaughter. I zoomed in on the photo. Brandon was in the background, blurring slightly, serving them like a waiter. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling, that desperate, pleasing smile he used when he wanted approval. They were celebrating my exclusion. They were toasting to their upgraded Christmas, happy that the embarrassing old man with the truck was gone so they could pretend to be aristocrats. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It was not the hot flash of anger that makes you shout. It was the freezing calculation of a man who realizes his investment has turned toxic. I closed the Facebook app and opened my contacts list. I scrolled past family, past friends, until I found the number for Samuel Abernathy. Abernathy was not just a lawyer, he was a shark in a 3-piece suit, my best friend from college and the only man who knew exactly how much I was worth. He had drafted the original agreement for the house, the one Brandon had signed without reading. Because he was too busy looking at the pool, I pressed call. It rang twice. Doug, Abernathy's voice was gravelly warm. "It is 8 p.m. Why are you not at the prep party with the kid?" "I was uninvited," I said, taking a slow sip of the scotch. Silence on the line, then a low, dark chuckle. "Uninvited, you pay for the roof over their heads, Doug." "Not anymore," I said. "I canceled the payments today, but that is not enough, Sam. I saw a picture. Ted Carter is sitting in my chair, drinking my wine. I want to activate the Prentice file." Abernathy whistled low. The Prentice file, the nuclear option. "You sure about this, Doug? Once we pull that trigger, there is no going back. That document contains the demand note, the second lien. It strips him of everything if he defaults. We are talking total financial ruin for the kid if he cannot pay up within 30 days. I looked at the photo again, at Ted. Carter's smug face at my son's weak smile at the caption about real class. "Execute it," I said softly. "Initiate clause 14B. I want the demand letter on his doorstep the morning after Christmas. Let them have their holiday, and then, Sam, I want you to take it all." I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The city below was busy with holiday shoppers, people rushing to buy gifts for people they loved. I watched them for a long time. The snow started to fall, dusting the world in white. It looked peaceful, but inside the penthouse, the war had just begun. My son wanted a Christmas without me. He wanted independence. He wanted to be a big man with his wife's fancy family. Well, I thought, finishing my drink, he is about to find out exactly how much being a big man costs. And the price is going to be a lot higher than $4,800 a month. January 1st is supposed to be a day of resolutions, a day of fresh starts and new beginnings. For me, it was simply a Tuesday on the Snake River, standing knee-deep in freezing water with a fly rod in my hand. The air was crisp enough to freeze the breath in my lungs, and the silence was absolute. Just the sound of the water rushing over the rocks and the rhythmic swish of my line cutting through the air. I had turned off the notifications for my emails, but I had left the ringer on for phone calls. Not because I wanted to talk to anyone, but because I knew the inevitable was coming, and a part of me, the cold calculator that had managed billion-dollar portfolios, wanted to know exactly when the bomb would detonate. It happened at 10:14 in the morning. The phone in my chest pocket vibrated against my heart, shattering the peace of the river. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. I reeled in my line, slowly set the rod against a large gray stone and pulled out the device. Brandon name flashed on the screen. I took a sip from my thermos of black coffee, letting the steam warm my face before I slid my thumb across the glass to answer. I did not say hello, I just listened. "Dad, what did you do?" The voice on the other end was not the voice of a 32-year-old man. It was the high-pitched panic of a teenager who had just crashed the family car. "There is a negative balance, Dad. A massive negative balance. The bank just took everything I had, and then they hit me with overdraft fees. What is going on? Did your transfer bounce?" I looked out at the river, watching a bald eagle circle overhead looking for prey. The contrast between the majesty of nature and the petty squabbling of my son was stark. "Happy New Year, Brandon," I said, my voice calm, steady, and completely devoid of the urgency he was projecting. "Happy New Year." "Are you crazy?" Brandon screamed, and I could hear the background noise of a television, probably the Rose Parade and the clinking of silverware. It sounded like they were having a brunch. "Did you hear me? The mortgage payment went through automatically, but your transfer was not there. The bank took $4,800 from my checking account, Dad. I have less than nothing in there right now. The auto draft triggered a cascade. I have 4 insufficient fund notices on my phone right now for the electric bill, the cable, and the gym membership. Fix this. You need to wire the money right now." I unscrewed the cap of my thermos and poured another cup. The steam rose in the cold air, swirling like smoke. I took my time answering, letting his panic fill the silence, letting him sweat. "I did not forget Brandon," I said. "I canceled the standing order." The silence on the other end was total. It lasted for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. "You what?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You canceled it. Why would you do that? Is this about Christmas?" "Dad, seriously, is this because we wanted one holiday alone?" I chuckled softly, a dry sound that was lost in the wind. "It is not about Christmas, son. It is about respect. And it is about listening. I listened to you, Brandon. You were very clear. You told me you wanted privacy. You told me you wanted to focus on your nuclear family. You told me I was crowding you, so I stepped back. I continued watching the eagle dive toward the water. I am respecting your boundaries. Financial boundaries are part of that. If you want to be a private, independent nuclear family, you need to pay for your own roof. That is how independence works, but you cannot just stop paying without telling me, Brandon. Voice rose again, cracking with hysteria. You know I do not have that kind of liquidity in my operating account. My salary is decent, but it is not enough to cover the mortgage and everything else right now. Not this month, and why is that, Brandon? I asked. I knew his salary. He made 6 figures. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover the bills if he lived within his means. Why are you broke on the 1st of January? There was a hesitation, a pause that told me everything I needed to know. It was the pause of a man who knows he has done something incredibly stupid and is about to be found out. I had expenses, Brandon mumbled. What expenses? I pressed, my voice hardened, losing the casual indifference of the fisherman and adopting the tone of the CFO conducting an audit. Speak up. We bought a car, he said, his voice small. You have a perfectly good car, I said. I bought you that Lexus 3 years ago. It is paid off. We needed something bigger, Brandon said, getting defensive again, something better for the snow. And since Ted and Linda were coming, Vanessa wanted to pick them up in something that looked appropriate. We leased a Range Rover, Dad, a brand new one. The down payment was $6,000, plus the first month lease. I closed my eyes and rubbed the bridge of my nose. A Range Rover. He had blown his entire liquidity on a down payment for a luxury SUV, just to impress a father-in-law who was technically homeless and a mother-in-law who judged people by their shoes. He had drained his safety net to play chauffeur for two parasites, assuming that Daddy would keep paying the mortgage on the mansion. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You spent your own money on a luxury car to impress the Carters, and you just assumed I would cover the roof over your head. You prioritized looking rich over actually being solvent. It is not like that, Dad. Brandon stammered. We thought we could handle it. We thought your transfer was guaranteed. You never said it was conditional. Everything is conditional. Brandon, I said. Relationships are conditional, respect is conditional, and my money is definitely conditional. You broke the terms of our arrangement when you decided I was not good enough to sit at your table. But don't not worry, you have that brand new Range Rover. You can sleep in that if the bank takes the house, Dad. Please, you have to fix this, the mortgage, payment. Bounced, my account is frozen, I cannot even buy groceries right now. Ted and Linda are expecting a prime rib dinner tonight. I cannot pay for it. I looked at the river again. The eagle had caught a fish. It was flying away, the silver scales of its prize flashing in the winter sun, nature taking its course, ruthless and efficient. That sounds like a nuclear family problem, Brandon. I said I suggest you ask Ted Carter for a loan. He seems like a man of means, does he not? Or maybe you can return the prime rib and eat humble pie. It is cheaper and it is much better for your character, Dad. Wait, do not hang up, I am fishing. Brandon, I said, I need to focus. The fish are biting today. I pressed the red button ending the call. I turned the phone off completely and slipped it back into my pocket. I stood there in the river for a long time listening to the water. The peace returned, but it was different now. It was heavy. It was the heavy silence of a bridge that had been burned to the ground. My son was in a panic. Not because he missed me, but because he had built a life of glass on a foundation of my money, and he had just thrown a rock at the only person holding it up. I cast my line back into the water, watching the fly dance on the surface. I wondered how the prime rib dinner would go tonight. I wondered how Vanessa would react when the debit card was declined at the grocery store. I wondered if Ted Carter would offer to pay, or if he would just sit there in my chair, drinking my wine, waiting for someone else to solve the problem. I caught 3 trout that day. I cleaned them right there on the bank, my hands numb from the cold. It was good, honest work, and as I drove back to the city, I knew this was just the first domino. The mortgage was just the beginning. Brandon had no idea how deep the hole really was. He had no idea about the insurance, the taxes, the utilities, the club memberships. He thought he was just missing one payment. He was about to find out he was missing an entire life support system. 2 days after I hung up on my son in the middle of the river, I sat in my study with a man named Julian, a private investigator who charged $300 an hour and was worth every penny. He handed me a thick manila folder filled with photographs and transcripts, detailing the events of January 1st inside the house I had paid for. The report painted a vivid picture of a sinking ship where the rats were already starting to turn on each other. It seems the prime rib dinner never made it to the table and the nuclear family was undergoing a meltdown. Julian told me that shortly after my phone call with Brandon. The atmosphere in the house shifted from celebration to panic. Brandon had tried to salvage the evening by going to the high-end butcher shop in town, intending to buy the $300 worth of prime beef Ted Carter was expecting. But when he got to the register, his debit card was declined. The bank had frozen his assets instantly, just as I predicted. He had to. leave the groceries on the counter, walking out past a line of neighbors who watched him crumble. He returned home not with a feast, but with a humiliating assortment of frozen pizzas and instant noodles he had purchased with the loose cash and coins found in the center console of his new Range Rover. The scene at the dining table that night was a masterpiece of dysfunction, described to me in delicious detail by Julian, who had sources close to the family. The fine china I had gifted them was set, but instead of a roast, it held blocks of congealed ramen and burnt pizza crusts. Ted Carter sat at the head of the table, staring down at the food with the disdain of a monarch served mud. He poked at the noodles with his silver fork, looking around the room, as if waiting for the real servants to appear with the real dinner. Linda was shivering, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders, because the smart thermostat, which I paid the monthly subscription for, had automatically reverted to eco mode to save energy, dropping the house temperature to a chilly 60 degrees, she complained loudly, asking why the fireplace wasn't lit, oblivious to the fact that the gas starter required a service fee that was no longer being auto-drafted. Vanessa, however, was the conductor of this train wreck. She was pacing the room, a glass of the last bottle of good wine in her hand, trying to spin the disaster into a narrative of victory. She was not eating, she was speechifying. She told Brandon to stop checking his banking app. She told him I was just a bitter old man throwing a senile tantrum, a lonely controller trying to buy affection, she said. Do not call him back, Brandon. He is bluffing. He is trying to manipulate us with money. But we have dignity. If you call him now, you are letting him win. He will pay it next week. He loves his reputation too much to let this house go into foreclosure. Just wait him out. Brandon sat with his head in his hands, the reality of his financial ruin pressing down on him. Tried to explain that the bank fees were piling up by the hour, that the mortgage was already technically late, but Vanessa cut him off with a sharp laugh. She called him weak. She told him he needed to stand up to his father to show me that they didn't need my charity, even as they sat in the dark eating food meant for college students. Then Ted Carter spoke up, wiping cheap tomato sauce from his lip. He did not offer to help. He did not pull out his wallet to cover the groceries or the bills. He looked at Brandon not with sympathy, but with the annoyance of a guest at a 5-star hotel where the service has suddenly slipped. He asked why the pool heater wasn't working. He said he had planned to take a morning swim, and the water was freezing. He asked why the premium cable channels were locked out, preventing him from watching his golf tournament. He looked at his son-in-law and said, Brandon, you need to handle your father. This is unacceptable. We came here for a relaxation, not to live like refugees. In a cold house, fix it, boy, or we are going to have a serious problem. The report ended with a description of the night conclusion. Brandon did not sleep in the master bedroom that night. Vanessa locked him out, telling him to sleep in the guest room until he grew a spine. He spent the first night of the new year on a lumpy mattress, listening to his in-laws complain. In the next room, while I slept soundly in my penthouse wrapped in silk sheets. The chaos was not just financial, it was structural. The foundation of their happiness was my checkbook, and without it, the walls were already caving in. I closed the folder and felt a cold satisfaction. The lesson had just begun, and they had no idea how much worse it was going to get. January 15th arrived with the gray, relentless precision of a tax audit. It is a date that holds no significance for the sentimental, but for a man of finance. It is a deadline etched in stone. It is the day the grace period ends, the day the polite reminders from the bank turn into legal threats, and the day the infrastructure of a subsidized life officially collapses. I sat in my office high above the city, watching the snow fall against the glass, sipping my coffee and waiting. The clock struck 9 in the morning, and I knew that across town in the house on Oak Street, the digital heartbeat of my son's life had just flatlined. I knew this because I was the administrator on the account. The internet service provider, a company that did not offer extensions for missed payments, had scheduled the disconnection for 9 a.m. sharp. Julian, my investigator, later described the scene to me with the dry precision of a war correspondent narrating a siege. The house went dark, not literally, but digitally. The high-speed fiber optic connection that powered their smart TVs, their tablets, their phones, and their connection to the outside world simply vanished. Ted Carter was the first to notice. He had been sitting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, because the heat was still set to eco mode, trying to check his stock portfolio on his laptop. Or at least pretending to check it. I always suspected Ted's portfolio was as empty as his promises. When the page failed to load, he tapped the keys aggressively, then slammed the laptop shut, screaming for Brandon. The modem lights had turned from a reassuring green to a dead, blinking red. Simultaneously in the den, Linda was trying to stream a morning talk show. The screen froze, spinning a buffering wheel that would never resolve. She let out a shriek that echoed through the cold house, accusing Brandon of breaking the television. But the digital blackout was just the first domino. The cable television, which I had bundled with the internet, cut out seconds later, leaving the screens filled with static and error messages. Then came the physical decay. The pool service, which came every Tuesday morning, did not show up. The heated pool out back, which required weekly chemical balancing and cleaning, was already starting to turn a murky shade of green. The filter system, sensing the lack of maintenance, had automatically shut down to protect the pumps. Leaves from the recent storm floated on the surface, uncared for, drifting like debris from a shipwreck. The pristine lawn was starting to look neglected. The trash bins from the previous week were still full at the curb because the private sanitation company had not received their quarterly retainer. Inside the kitchen, Brandon was staring at his phone, watching the signal bars drop. He was trying to use his cellular data, but without the Wi-Fi to support the heavy load of 4 adults constantly streaming. The data cap was hit within minutes, throttling their speed to a crawl. He stood in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by the complaints of his in-laws, feeling the walls close in. Then the doorbell rang. It was not a visitor, it was the mailman delivering a certified letter. The envelope was thick, ominous, and stamped with red ink. Brandon signed for it, his hand shaking. He knew what. It was before he opened it. I had received a copy digitally at the same moment. The bank does not play games with high-value mortgages. He tore open the envelope right there in the kitchen. The letterhead was from the foreclosure department of First National Bank. The words were bold and uncompromising. Notice of default, acceleration of debt. It stated clearly that the mortgage was past due, that the grace period had expired, and that unless the full amount, plus late fees and penalties, was paid immediately, the bank would begin the legal process of seizing the property. The timeline was short, the threat was absolute. Brandon dropped the letter on the counter. The paper slid across the granite, stopping next to a bowl of rotting fruit. Vanessa snatched it up, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. Her face, which usually held a mask of superior boredom, twisted into a scowl of pure venom. "He is doing this on purpose," she hissed, throwing the letter down. "This is not just him stopping payment. Brandon, this is an attack. He wants to humiliate us. He wants my parents to see us fail. Look at this, he cut the internet. He cut the pool. He probably called the bank personally to speed this up." Ted Carter walked into the kitchen, holding his dead laptop like a shield. "This is unacceptable, Brandon," he boomed, his voice shaking with the indignation of a man who has never paid a bill on time in his life. "We are freezing, we are bored, and now I find out we might be homeless. Is this how you provide for your family? You brought us here under false pretenses. You promised us a luxury holiday, and we are living in a squatter camp," Linda chimed in, wrapping her arms around herself. "We should have stayed in Florida. We should have gone to a hotel." "This is abusive, Brandon. Your father is a monster for letting this happen to us, but you are the one who let him get away with it." Brandon looked at them, looked at his wife, and looked at the foreclosure notice. He was cornered, he was broke, and he was terrified. But instead of seeing the truth, instead of realizing that he was the captain of this sinking ship, he let Vanessa steer him toward the only target they felt comfortable attacking. "He is not going to get away with this," Vanessa said, her voice low and dangerous. She walked over to Brandon and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him. "Look at me. He is sitting in that sad little rental apartment of his, probably laughing at us. He thinks he can teach us a lesson. He thinks he can control us with his money, but he is forgetting something. He needs us. He is a lonely old man, Brandon, and we are the only family he has left. If he wants to see a grandchild, ever, he needs to fix this today." She grabbed the keys to the Range Rover off the counter. The car was the only thing they had left that felt expensive, even though the lease payment was already late. "Get your coat," she ordered Brandon. "We are going there right now. We are going to drive to his apartment, and we are going to confront him. We are not going to ask Brandon. We are going to demand. You are going to tell him that if he does not turn the lights back on and pay this mortgage immediately, he will never see us again. He will die alone in that apartment. Is that clear?" Brandon nodded, his eyes wide and fearful, but also lighting up with a misplaced anger. He needed a villain, and Vanessa had just handed him one. He grabbed his coat, buttoning it up to hide the trembling in his hands. "You are right," he said, his voice gaining a false strength. "He owes us this. He promised to support us. He cannot just pull the rug out because his feelings are hurt. Let it go." They marched out of the house, leaving Ted and Linda in the cold, dark kitchen. The Range Rover roared to life in the driveway, the engine growling like a beast. I watched the GPS tracker on the vehicle activate on my screen. They were moving. They were heading toward the city, toward the address they thought was my home, the modest 2-bedroom rental I kept as a decoy. I sat back in my leather chair in the penthouse 30 floors above the street and smiled. They were coming to demand, they were coming to threaten, and they were coming to a place where I was not. But they were also coming to the city where I held all the cards. I picked up my phone and called the building manager of the rental property, a man. I paid very well to be discreet. "Mr. Martinez," I said. "They are on their way. Let them up, let them knock, and when they realize I am not there, give them the envelope." I left at the front desk. I hung up and turned my chair toward the window, watching the snow swirl around the skyscrapers. The confrontation they wanted was not the one they were going to get. They thought they were driving to intimidate a helpless father. They were actually driving straight into a trap that had been set 5 years ago, and the jaws were about to snap shut. The elevator that opened directly into my living room was a private express line from the lobby, a mechanical marvel that moved so smoothly you could balance a nickel on its edge. While it climbed 30 stories, I stood in the center of the room waiting. The envelope I had left for them at the rental desk contained only a key card and a floor number. I wanted them to come to me. I wanted them to make the journey from the cold, slushy street up into the clouds. I wanted the physical ascension to mirror the reality check they were about to receive. I was wearing a midnight blue silk dressing gown, the kind that costs more than a decent suit, paired with velvet slippers that had never touched a sidewalk. In my hand, I held a crystal glass filled with a 1982 Bordeaux, a wine that breathed money. The room was dim, lit only by the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the soft amber light of the fireplace. The elevator chime was soft, a polite announcement of the incoming storm. The brushed steel doors slid open, revealing Brandon and Vanessa. They looked like drowned rats. Their coats were damp from the snow, their faces flushed with the biting cold and the heat of their rage. Vanessa was mid-sentence, her finger pointed at the empty air, ready to jab into my chest. "You listen to me, you old!" She started storming out of the elevator, but the sentence died in her throat. She stopped dead. Brandon bumped into her back, stumbling forward. They both froze. The anger that had propelled them across the city hit a wall of sheer, unadulterated opulence. They looked at the Italian marble floors, the baby grand piano in the corner, the original oil paintings on the walls, and the panoramic view of the city that sparkled like a jewelry box below them. Their eyes finally landed on me, standing by the fireplace swirling my wine, looking like the owner of the world. "Dad," Brandon whispered, his voice echoing in the vast room. "What is this? Where are we?" I took a slow sip of the Bordeaux, letting the tannins settle on my tongue. "Welcome home, son," I said, my voice calm, velvety. Or rather, welcome to my home, the one you never bothered to ask about. Vanessa recovered first. Her eyes darted around the room, calculating, appraising. The shock was replaced by a new kind of fury. The fury of someone who realizes they have been sitting on a gold mine without a shovel. She marched toward me, her wet boots squeaking on the marble. "You hid this," she hissed. Her voice was trembling, not with fear, but with greed and indignation. "You have been living like this while we were struggling. You have millions, apparently, and you let us worry about credit card bills. You are sick, Doug. You are a sick, selfish old man." I did not move, I did not flinch. I simply watched her approach like a biologist observing a specimen struggling. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You define struggling as leasing a Range Rover and buying designer handbags. Is that the struggle you are referring to, Vanessa?" "Do not twist this," she screamed, throwing her arms out, gesturing at the luxury around us. "You lied to us. You pretended to be a pensioner in a rental apartment. You let us pay for dinner sometimes. You let us buy you gifts, thinking you were on a fixed income. You manipulated us." "I manipulated no one," I said calmly, walking over to the bar to set down my glass. "I simply chose not to disclose my full portfolio. You assumed I was poor because it made you feel superior. You liked the narrative of the successful young couple taking care of the old man. It fed your ego. But the moment I became inconvenient, the moment I became a burden to your social climbing, you cut me out." Brandon walked further into the room, looking at a framed photo on the mantel. It was a picture of me ringing the opening bell at the stock exchange 10 years ago, a part of my life he had never asked about, because he was too busy talking about himself. "Dad, you have all this," he said, his voice thick with betrayal. "And you cut off our mortgage. You let the bank send a foreclosure notice. You cut the heat. You let us freeze for 2 days when you could have paid that bill with the change in your pocket. Why? Why are you doing this to us?" "Because I can," I said, turning to face him. "And because you needed to learn that money is a tool, not an entitlement. You uninvited me, Brandon. You told me I was not good enough for your table. You chose your wife's parents, people who have never earned a dime. They didn't borrow over the father who has subsidized your entire adult life. We just wanted one Christmas alone," Vanessa shouted, interrupting him. She was shaking now, her face red. "Her parents are guests. They are delicate. You are family. You are supposed to understand. You are supposed to sacrifice for your children. That is what parents do. You are selfish, Doug. You are the most selfish person I have ever met, hoarding all this wealth while your son drowns." "Selfish," I laughed. A low, dry sound. "I paid your down payment. Vanessa, $40,000. I paid for your wedding, $50,000. I have paid your mortgage, your insurance, your taxes, your club fees, and your vacations for 5 years. That totals nearly $500,000, if that is selfishness. I would hate to see your definition of generosity." "That is different," she argued, stepping closer, her perfume clashing with the smell of the wood smoke. "It is your duty. You have so much, and we are just starting out. We are your legacy if you let us fail. You look bad, my legacy." I picked up the poker and adjusted a log in the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "My legacy is not a house you cannot afford, or a car you lease to impress strangers. My legacy was supposed to be a son with integrity, a son who values loyalty over appearances. But looking at you now, standing in my living room demanding my money after spitting in my face, I see I have made a poor investment. Brandon looked up from the floor. Dad, please, we can fix this. Just turn the transfers back on, please. The Carters are at the house. We look like fools. I turned to face them, fully tightening the belt of my silk robe. You look like fools because you are fools, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Losing all warmth, you brought parasites into your home and tried to feed them with my blood, and now you are mad that the vein has dried up. You owe us, Vanessa shrieked, losing control completely. She looked like she wanted to attack me, but the sheer scale of the room held her back. You owe us for the time we spent with you. You owe us for the grandkids we might give you someday. You think you can just buy peace and quiet. You are going to die alone in this penthouse, Doug, and we won't be there. I smiled a cold, humorless smile that didn't reach my eyes. That is the plan, Vanessa. I would rather die alone in peace than live surrounded by vultures waiting to pick my bones clean. I walked over to the wall panel and pressed a button. The elevator doors slid open again, waiting. Get out, I said softly. Brandon looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. Dad, please, do not do this. We have nowhere to go. You have a Range Rover, I said, and you have the Carters. I am sure Ted has a brilliant plan to save you. Maybe he can sell some of his stories. Go home, Brandon. Or go wherever you want. But get out of my house. Vanessa grabbed Brandon's arm, dragging him toward the elevator. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. You will regret this, she spat. You will come crawling back when you get sick, when you need someone to change your diapers. We will remember this. I picked up my wine glass and toasted her. I am counting on it, my dear. Now goodbye. They stepped into the elevator, Vanessa still shouting curses, Brandon looking back at me with the eyes of a lost child. The doors slid shut, cutting off their noise, restoring the silence of the penthouse. I stood there for a long time watching the numbers above the elevator count down 30-20-10 lobby. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted better than it ever had. It tasted like victory. But the night was not over. I walked to my desk and picked up the dossier Abernathy had sent over. The private investigator's report on Ted Carter. It was time for the second phase. First lesson was about money. The second lesson was going to be about truth. And Ted Carter, the man eating my food and sleeping in my house, had a lot of truth he was hiding. The silence in the penthouse after the elevator doors slid shut was heavy, but it was the good kind of heavy. It was the weight of a decision finally made, the settling of dust after a demolition. I finished my wine, placing the crystal glass on the coaster with a deliberate click. My son and his wife were gone, retreating back to the cold reality of their unheated house, but my work for the evening was not finished. I walked over to my mahogany desk, where the thick manila envelope from Julian sat under the glow of the banker's lamp. It was time to look at the second ledger. I sat down and cut the seal with a letter opener. The dossier was comprehensive. Julian did not just find dirt, he excavated it. The first thing that slid out was a photograph of Ted Carter, not at a country club or on a yacht, but walking out of a bankruptcy court in Fort Lauderdale, looking disheveled and angry. I picked up the summary sheet and began to read. The narrative of the wealthy, retired Florida businessman crumbled with every line. Ted Carter was not retired, he was hiding. According to the court documents attached to the file, Theodore Carter had filed for Chapter 7, bankruptcy, 3 months ago, but the trustee had flagged the filing for fraud. Apparently, Ted had tried to hide assets, funneling cash into shell accounts to avoid paying a judgment from a failed real estate venture that looked suspiciously like a Ponzi scheme. He was not just broke, he was actively being hunted by creditors and process servers in the state of Florida. I turned the page and found a copy of a foreclosure notice for a condo in Boca Raton. It was dated November 1st. The bank had taken possession. The luxury life Vanessa bragged about, the estate she claimed her parents were downsizing from, did not exist. They had been evicted. The sheriff had given them 4 hours to vacate the premises on December 10th, 5 days before Brandon called to uninvite me from Christmas. The timeline was sickeningly perfect. I looked at a series of surveillance photos Julian had taken at the airport when the Carters arrived. I had not seen these before. In the photos, Ted and Linda were standing at the baggage claim. They did not have the usual 2 suitcases for a holiday visit. They had 8 massive trunks along with golf clubs, boxes taped shut, and a birdcage. They had not come to visit for the holidays. They had moved in. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold knot of disgust tighten in my stomach. This was the grand plan. This was why Vanessa had been so desperate for privacy, so insistent on the nuclear family narrative. She was not protecting her parents from my dog or my old truck. She was hiding the fact that her parents were homeless fugitives running from the law, and she intended to house them in my property on my dime. Indefinitely, I flipped to the section on Linda Carter. It was just as damning. There were records of maxed-out credit cards and a lawsuit from a local boutique for unpaid merchandise. She was a woman who shopped to fill a void, and when the money ran out, she simply stopped paying. The report noted that her Social Security checks were already being garnished. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the conversation I had just had with Brandon. He had leased a Range Rover to impress a man who was technically a squatter. He had kicked his own father out of his life to make room for a con artist who was planning to sleep in his guest room until the end of time. And Vanessa knew she had to know. You do not pack your entire life into 8 trunks for a 10-day vacation. She knew her parents were destitute. She knew they had lost the condo. She knew they were coming to stay forever. And instead of asking for help, instead of being honest, she had tried to bully me into funding their asylum. She wanted to secure the house, get me out of the picture, and turn 24 Oak Street into a sanctuary for her grifter parents. It was a parasitic invasion. The uninviting wasn't an emotional slight. It was a tactical maneuver. They needed the space and they needed the control. They could not have me coming over asking questions, noticing that Ted never seemed to have a return flight booked, noticing that the boxes in the garage never got unpacked. They needed the host organism to be absent while they fed. I looked at the photo of Ted Carter again, at his arrogant sneer, even as he walked out of bankruptcy court. He was a man who believed the world owed him a living. He was currently sleeping in a bed. I paid for eating food. I paid for, and complaining about the temperature I paid for. I picked up the phone and dialed Abernathy number. "Even though it was late, Sam," I said. When he answered, I just finished the Carter file. "It is worse than we thought. He is not just a moocher, he is running from a fraud indictment in Florida." I heard the rustle of papers on the other end. "I figured as much," Abernathy said. "What do you want to do?" "The eviction notice for the mortgage default goes out tomorrow." "That is good," I said. "But I want to add something to the file. Ted Carter is listed as a guest at the residence, correct?" "Technically, yes." Abernathy replied. "Well," I said, looking at the foreclosure notice on my desk, "if he is using the address to evade federal process servers, that makes the property a party to harboring a fugitive, does it not?" Abernathy laughed, a low, dry sound. "Doug, you are a vicious man. I like it. I will make a call to the Florida trustee's office in the morning, giving them an updated address for Mr. Carter. I am sure they will be very interested to know where he is hiding his golf clubs." "Do it," I said. "And Sam, accelerate the foreclosure. I do not want them getting comfortable. They think they found a lifeboat. I want them to realize they jumped onto the Titanic." "Huh?" I hung up and closed the folder. The anger was gone, replaced by the cold precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. My son was going to lose his house, but he was going to be saved from a lifetime of supporting these leeches. He wouldn't thank me for it, not yet, but one day, when the fog cleared, he would see that I didn't just stop paying his bills, I stopped a robbery in progress. The week following the confrontation in my penthouse was a study in manic desperation down on Oak Street. My private investigator Julian kept me updated with daily reports that read like the script of a tragedy performed by clowns. The foreclosure clock was ticking. The heat was still off, and the pool was now a biological hazard. But instead of seeking humility, Vanessa found a calculator. She did the math that every amateur real estate investor does when they are backed into a corner. She calculated the equity. I received the news via a Zillow alert on my phone. The notification popped up while I was having a light lunch at my club 24 Oak Street was listed for sale. The asking price was aggressive, $650,000. According to the market, the house had appreciated significantly since I bought it 5 years ago. Brandon and Vanessa had done the same math. They figured they owed the bank maybe $350,000. If they sold for $650,000, even after fees, they would walk away with nearly $250,000 in cash. It was their golden parachute. Vanessa had convinced Brandon that this was the ultimate power move. They would sell the house, pay off the bank debts, lease a trendy downtown loft, and still have enough cash to buy a new wardrobe and keep Ted and Linda in the lifestyle to which they felt entitled. They saw the house not as a home I had provided, but as a piggy bank. They were about to smash open. Julian told me the atmosphere in the house shifted overnight from doom to frantic optimism. They hired a staging company, paying the deposit on a credit card that hadn't been declined, yet probably one of Linda's secret emergency cards. They spent 3 days scrubbing the neglect from the property. They bought space heaters to warm the rooms during showings, hiding them behind furniture, so potential buyers wouldn't realize the central heat was dead. They shocked the pool with so much chlorine the fumes could be smelled from the street, trying to turn the green swamp back into blue for just long enough to fool a buyer. I drove by the house the day before the open house purely as an observer. The for sale sign was planted in the front lawn, bold and arrogant. A streamer of balloons bobbed in the cold wind. I saw Brandon in the driveway, power washing the siding, trying to blast away the evidence of his own laziness. He looked determined. He looked hopeful, and he looked like a man who thought he had found a checkmate. I picked up my phone and called Abernathy. "Sam," I said, watching my son spray water onto the frozen driveway. "They listed it. They are going for a quick sale, open house. Is tomorrow." I heard the rustle of paper on the other end. "Good," Abernathy said. "Let them dig. The title search hasn't happened yet. When a buyer gets serious, the title company will pull the records. That is when they will see the lien." "No," I said, interrupting him. "I don't want the title company to flag it quietly. I don't want a realtor whispering bad news to them over the phone. I want them to get an offer. I want them to accept it. I want them to walk into the closing room thinking they are minutes away from a $200,000 check. I want them to taste the champagne, Sam. And then I want you to walk in." "You are a cruel man," Doug Abernathy said with a chuckle. "I will have the papers ready. Just give me the word." I drove away, leaving Brandon to his power washing. He had no idea the equity he was banking on the profit. He was already mentally spending did not exist. He had forgotten, or perhaps never bothered, to read the paperwork he signed 5 years ago. When I bought the house, I put down $200,000 of my own money. But I didn't just give it to him. I had Abernathy draft a demand note, a second mortgage secured by the property for the full amount of the down payment, plus interest, plus every monthly payment I made on his behalf. It was a safety mechanism, a dormant lien designed to protect my investment, in case he ever tried to sell the house without my permission, or in case he decided to cut me out of his life. Technically, the house had zero equity. In fact, with the interest accrued, Brandon was underwater. He owed me more than the house was worth. If he sold it, every single penny from the sale would go to the bank first, and then to me. He would walk away with nothing but the closing costs and the broker fees. The open house on Sunday was a circus. The real estate agent, a friend of Vanessa S. named Chloe who wore too much perfume and didn't check title records, managed to pack the place. The driveway was full of cars. People were walking through the rooms marveling at the crown molding and the chef kitchen. Unaware that the gas was turned off, Vanessa was holding court in the living room wearing a white coat to hide her shivering, smiling like a lottery winner. She was telling anyone who would listen that they were downsizing because they wanted to travel more to be free of the burden of such a large estate. Ted Carter was there too, acting like the lord of the manor. He was drinking the last of my scotch, telling prospective buyers about the improvements he had supposedly overseen, pointing out the craftsmanship of the deck, as if he had built it himself. He looked smug, safe in the knowledge that his daughter's equity would fund his next few months of hiding from the Florida authorities. I sat in my car down the street watching the parade. It was the height of their arrogance. They were selling my gift to pay for their betrayal. They were standing in the house I paid for, selling it to strangers to finance their escape from the consequences of their actions. By Monday morning, they had 3 offers. By Tuesday, they had accepted one well over the asking price, an all-cash offer from a developer who wanted a quick close, and it was perfect. The speed was exactly what they wanted and exactly what I needed. Brandon called me on Wednesday. His voice was smug, dripping with a false magnanimity. "Dad," he said, "just wanted to let you know. We sold the house. We got a great price. We are closing next week. We are going to pay off the bank and move on. We don't need your money anymore." We handled it. I listened to his bravado, feeling a twinge of pity mixed with the resolve of a surgeon holding the scalpel. "That is good, Brandon," I said sincerely. "I am glad you found a solution. I hope the closing goes smoothly." "It will," he assured me. "We have a great lawyer, Vanessa S. friend. We are finally going to be independent." Dad, really independent. I hung up and looked at the calendar. The closing was set for Friday at 10 a.m. at the title company downtown. I called Abernathy. "Friday at 10, I said. "Bring the demand note. And Sam, bring the calculator. I want them to see the exact math. I want them to see exactly how much their independence costs." The trap was set. They were walking into that closing room expecting a payday. They were going to leave with a debt, and the look on Vanessa's face when she realized her golden parachute was actually an anvil was something I was willing to pay any price to see. The conference room at Centennial Title smelled of cheap hazelnut coffee and premature victory. It was a windowless box on the 4th floor of a glass building downtown, designed to facilitate the transfer of millions of dollars in the most boring way possible. But to my son, Brandon, and his wife, Vanessa, this beige room was the finish line of a marathon they thought they had won. I watched them through the glass partition. Before I entered, Brandon was spinning a pen in his fingers, leaning back in his chair with a relaxed posture I had not seen in months. He looked like a man who had just successfully defused a bomb, unaware that he was actually sitting on a landmine. Vanessa was vibrating with energy, tapping furiously on her phone, probably texting her mother Linda about the impending windfall. She was wearing a white coat and sunglasses perched on her head, looking every inch the wealthy socialite she pretended to be. The buyer was there too, a developer named Mr. Sterling, who looked at his watch every 30 seconds, clearly anxious to sign the papers and get back to a real job. The escrow officer, a woman named Sarah, was organizing a stack of documents inches high. Preparing for the final signatures, I checked my own watch. It was 9:58 a.m. Samuel Abernathy stood next to me, adjusting his cufflinks. He held a black leather portfolio under his arm, thin, elegant, and devastating. Inside it was a single piece of paper that weighed more than the entire house on Oak Street. "Ready, Sam?" I asked quietly. Abernathy smiled a shark-like grin that showed too many teeth always dug. "Let us go ruin a party." I pushed the door open. The heavy oak swung inward with a solid thud. The conversation inside the room stopped instantly. Brandon looked up, his smile freezing in place like a glitch on a video screen. Vanessa dropped her phone onto the table, the clatter echoing in the silence. Mr. Sterling looked annoyed while Sarah, the escrow officer, looked confused. "Dad." Brandon stammered, half rising from his chair. "What are you doing here? The closing is private. We do not need you to sign anything. The deed is in my name, remember." I walked to the end of the table and pulled out the empty chair, sitting down with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who owns the building. Brandon sat back down, unsure of what to do. His eyes darted to Vanessa, seeking instruction, but for once she looked just as lost as he did. "I am not here to sign the deed." "Brandon," I said, crossing my legs and smoothing my trousers. "I am here as an interested party, or more accurately, I am here as the primary lion holder." Vanessa let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Lien holder? What are you talking about, Doug? You stopped paying the mortgage, remember? That is why we are selling. We are paying off the bank and walking away with our equity. You have no claim on this house, none. You gave it to us. It was a gift." Abernathy stepped forward, placing the black portfolio on the table. He opened it slowly, revealing the document inside. It was a thick, cream-colored paper with a blue legal border stamped and notarized 5 years ago. "Actually, Mrs. Prentice," Abernathy said, his voice smooth as silk, "that is a common misconception. Mr. Prentice did not give you the house, he facilitated the purchase, and while the bank holds the first mortgage for the balance of the loan, Mr. Prentice holds a secured second mortgage for the down payment, plus all subsequent monthly payments made on Brandon's behalf. It is what we call a demand note, with a balloon payment clause triggered upon the sale or transfer of the property." Brandon stared at the lawyer, his face draining of color. "What demand?" "Note, I never signed a demand note. I signed the closing papers 5 years ago. It was just standard stuff." Abernathy slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Brandon. "Do you recognize your signature, son?" Brandon looked down. There, at the bottom of the page in blue ink, was his own signature, loopy and rushed. It was dated the day of the original closing 5 years ago. I remember that day, clearly. Brandon had been so excited about the pool and the 3-car garage that he hadn't bothered to read the stack of documents Abernathy had put in front of him. He had just signed and signed, trusting that his father and his father's lawyer were handling the boring details. And we were handling them by ensuring that if he ever tried to cash out on my hard work, I would be the first one in line to get paid. "This says," Brandon read, his voice trembling, "this says, I acknowledge a debt of $200,000, plus interest accruing at 4% annually. And it says any monthly payments made by the lender, Douglas Prentice, are added to the principal balance." I leaned forward, doing the mental math out loud for the room. "Let us break it down, shall we? The sale price is $650,000. A great price, Brandon, really well done. The first mortgage to the bank is roughly $350,000. That leaves $300,000 on the table. That is the equity you were counting on, correct?" Vanessa nodded slowly, her eyes narrowed, calculating. "You cannot take it all, Doug. That is our money." I ignored her and continued. "The down payment I provided was $200,000, with 5 years of interest. That is now roughly $240,000. Then there are the monthly mortgage payments I made for 60 months at $4,800 a month. That is another $288,000 plus the taxes and insurance." I looked at Sarah, the escrow officer, who was frantically typing into her computer, pulling up the title report. "Update that Abernathy had filed that morning, Sarah. What is the total payoff amount for the second lien held by the Prentice Trust?" Sarah looked at the screen, her eyes widening slightly. "Mr. Prentice, according to the filing, the total payoff amount required to clear the title is $528,000. The room went dead silent. The numbers hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, so I continued, my voice calm. If we take the sale price of $650 and subtract the bank, $350, we have $300 left, but you owe me $528,000. That means, Brandon, that after you sell this house, you will walk away with $0. In fact, after the closing costs and the broker fees for your friend Chloe, you will actually owe money at the table. You are insolvent. Brandon looked at me, his mouth open, a silent scream of denial trapped in his throat. Vanessa stood up, knocking her chair back. It crashed against the wall with a violence that made Mr. Sterling jump. "This is a trick," she screamed, her composure shattering completely. "You forged this. You tricked him into signing it." "This is fraud. We have a lawyer," Abernathy laughed softly. "Mrs. Prentice, I assure you, the paperwork is ironclad. It was filed with the county clerk 5 years ago. It just sat dormant on the title until a sale was initiated. It is a standard protection for parents who loan money to children. It prevents exactly what is happening right now. It prevents the child from selling the asset and running off with the parent." Mr. Sterling, the developer, cleared his throat. "Look, I do not care about your family drama. I have a cashier's check here for $650,000. I want the house, so who do I give the money to?" Sarah looked at the settlement statement. "The way this is structured, Mr. Sterling, the first mortgage gets paid off entirely. The remaining funds would go directly to the second lien holder, Mr. Douglas Prentice. There are no proceeds left for the seller. In fact, the seller would need to bring a check for the closing costs, roughly $30,000, to finalize the deal." Brandon put his head in his hands, letting out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. $30,000, Dad. I do not have $30,000. I do not have $30, you know that. You know I spent everything on the car, I nodded. Yes, I know. And since you cannot cover the closing costs, you cannot sell the house, which means you are still in default on the first mortgage. The foreclosure will proceed. The bank will take the house, Brandon. And since you are underwater on the debt, they will likely sue you for the deficiency. You are not just broke, son, you are bankrupt. Vanessa lunged across the table, grabbing the document and trying to tear it. Abernathy was faster, snatching it back with the reflexes of a man who had dealt with angry heirs for 40 years. "Careful, Vanessa," he warned. "Destroying a legal copy does not erase the debt. The original is in a vault." Vanessa turned to me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "You planned this," she hissed. "You planned this from the beginning. You gave us that house just so you could take it away. You wanted to control us. You are a monster. Doug, you are a sick, manipulative monster." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. "I did not plan for you to fail. Vanessa, I planned for you to succeed. I protected my investment just in case you didn't. I hoped you would live in that house for 20 years, raise a family and build a life. If you had done that, the demand note would have stayed in the vault, gathering dust. It would have been forgiven in my will. But you got greedy, you tried to cash out, you tried to take the money and run, and now you found out that the money was never yours." Brandon looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and wet. "Dad, please just forgive the note. Let us have the money. We can start over. We can get a small apartment. We will pay you back eventually, I promise." I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had tried to teach about honor. "Eventually is a long time, Brandon, and promises from you have lost their value. You uninvited me from your life. You made it clear I was a burden, so I am removing the burden of my money from your shoulders. You are free now. You are independent, just like you wanted." Mr. Sterling stood up, shaking his head. "This is a waste of my time. If the seller cannot close, I am pulling the offer. Sarah, return my deposit." "I am walking, no!" Brandon shouted, standing up, reaching for the developer. "Wait, we can work something out." Sterling ignored him, walking out the door without looking back. The deal was dead. The money was gone. The house was lost. I turned to Abernathy. "Let us go, Sam. I think we are done here." We walked out of the conference room, leaving Brandon and Vanessa standing in the wreckage of their future. As the door closed behind us, I heard Vanessa scream a primal sound of rage and despair. It echoed down the hallway, but I did not stop walking. I felt a strange emptiness in my chest, a hollow space where hope used to be, but it was better than the fool. It's paradise I had been living in. I had cut off the limb to save the body. It hurt, but it was necessary, and as I stepped into the elevator, I knew the hardest part was over. Now I just had to watch them fall. The silence in the conference room was not empty. It was heavy, compressed by the weight of a number that had just sucked the oxygen out of the air. $528,000, Sarah. The escrow officer had spoken the figure with the professional detachment of an undertaker, reading a death certificate. But to my son Brandon and his wife Vanessa, it was the sound of a guillotine blade hitting the block. I watched Brandon S.'s face. The color had drained away, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He was looking at the settlement statement on the table, his eyes darting back and forth between the sale price and the lien amount, trying to find a mathematical loophole that did not exist. He was moving his lips silently, doing the arithmetic of a desperate man. "Let us be precise," I said, leaning forward and tapping the mahogany table with my index finger, drawing their attention away from their panic and back to the cold, hard reality. "I want everyone in this room to understand the equation perfectly. The sale price is $650,000. A commendable figure, but the bank takes their cut first. The first mortgage payoff is $350,000. That leaves exactly $300,000 of gross equity." Vanessa looked up and her eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "But that is enough," she snapped, her voice cracking. "It is $300,000, Doug. That is our money. You cannot just erase it with a piece of paper." "It is not just a piece of paper, Vanessa," I said. My voice steady, devoid of any emotion. "It is a secured debt, and debts must be paid." I turned back to Brandon. "The second lien, my lien, is for $528,000. So let us do the final subtraction. 300,000 minus 528,000 equals negative $228,000. I let the number hang in the air. Negative $228,000. That means I continued enjoying the absolute horror dawning on my son's face that you are not walking away with a check. Brandon, you are walking away with a deficiency. You are insolvent. The moment you sign those papers, you are technically bankrupt. You do not have enough equity to cover the debts secured by this property. You are underwater by $250,000. Brandon slumped in his chair, his body collapsing as if his skeleton had suddenly dissolved. He looked at his hands, then at the expensive watch on his wrist, a watch he had probably charged to a credit card I was paying for until last week. "I am broke," he whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of absolute defeat. "I have nothing, you have less than nothing," I corrected. "You have a liability, and we haven't even factored in the closing costs, the broker fees, the transfer taxes." "Who is paying those, Sarah?" The escrow officer cleared her throat, looking uncomfortable. "Typically, the seller pays those costs from the proceeds," she said softly. "But since there are no proceeds, the seller would need to bring cash to the closing table, approximately $32,000. Vanessa let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She stood up so abruptly, her chair tipped over, crashing onto the floor with a violence that made Mr. Sterling, the developer, flinch. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white, her manicured nails digging into the wood. "This is a lie," she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "You rigged this. You set us up. You let us list the house. You let us stage it. You let us believe we were going to be free just to humiliate us. You are a monster. Doug, a sick, sadistic monster." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at her with the cold indifference of a man watching a bad investment finally be written off. I let you experience the consequences of your own greed. Vanessa, I said calmly, you wanted to sell the asset I provided. You wanted to cash out on my generosity. But you forgot that in the real world, investors get paid back. You thought you were entitled to the profit from my capital. You were wrong, Mr. Sterling. The developer stood up. He buttoned his jacket, his face hard. He was a businessman, and he knew a dead deal when he saw one. He looked at Brandon, then at me, then at the hysterical woman screaming at the end of the table. I am done here, Sterling said, his voice flat. Sarah, cancel the escrow. I am withdrawing my offer, no. Brandon shouted, scrambling up from his chair, reaching out as if to physically restrain the buyer. Wait. Please, Mr. Sterling, we can work this out. We can dispute the lien, we can fight it. Just give us time. Sterling looked at Brandon with a mixture of pity and disgust. Kid, you have a clouded title and a $250,000 deficit. There is nothing to work out. I am not buying a lawsuit. I am walking. Return my deposit, Sarah. He turned and walked out the door, his footsteps echoing in the hallway, a steady rhythm of opportunity leaving the building. Vanessa screamed again, a primal sound of rage and despair. She swept her arm across the table, sending the stack of documents flying. The papers fluttered through the air like the feathers of a dead bird settling on the floor, in a chaotic mess of legal jargon and broken dreams. You ruined everything, she sobbed, collapsing onto the floor amidst the paperwork. You ruined our lives. I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket. I looked down at them, Brandon standing frozen with his mouth open, tears streaming down his face, and Vanessa weeping on the floor, the wreckage of their arrogance scattered around them. I did not ruin your life, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. I just stopped paying for it. I turned to Abernathy, who had watched the entire scene with the stoic expression of a man who charges $600 an hour. Come on. Sam, I said, we have other business to attend to. We walked out of the conference room, leaving the door open behind us. The sound of Vanessa S. weeping followed us down the hall, a pathetic soundtrack to their total collapse. I pressed the button for the elevator, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. The illusion was over. The Band-Aid had been ripped off. It was a bloody mess, but the wound could finally start to clean itself. My son was broke. He was homeless, and for the first time in his life, he was completely and utterly free from the burden of my money. The fallout from the closing table did not stay in that beige conference room. It spilled out onto the internet like a burst sewage pipe, staining everything it touched. Vanessa, having lost the legal battle, decided to fight a different kind of war, one where facts did not matter, and the jury was millions of strangers with smartphones. I was sitting in my penthouse the next morning, drinking coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal, when my phone began to vibrate violently. It was not a call, it was a deluge of notifications. I opened my social media app, an account I rarely used, and found myself tagged in a video that was already trending locally. The thumbnail showed Vanessa, her eyes swollen and red tears streaming down her face, holding a cardboard box in front of the locked gates of the Oak Street house. The caption read, "The face of financial abuse my billionaire father-in-law just made us homeless." I pressed play. Vanessa S. voice was trembling, a masterpiece of performance art. "Hey guys," she whispered, looking directly into the camera. "I didn't want to do this, but I have nowhere else to turn. Yesterday, my husband and I were kicked out of our home. We were sold a lie. My husband's father, Douglas Prentice, a man who has millions sitting in the bank, decided to pull the rug out from under us just because we wanted to set healthy boundaries." She sniffled, wiping her nose with a tissue. She conveniently left out the demand note, the years of unpaid bills, and the fact that she had tried to cash out on my investment. Instead, she painted a picture of a cruel, miserly tyrant. "He tricked us," she sobbed. "He let us believe the house was ours. And then when we tried to sell it to pay off debts, he showed up with a lawyer and took everything. He left his own son with nothing, not even enough for a motel. We are sleeping on my parents' floor tonight because of his greed. The video cut to Brandon looking defeated, sitting on a suitcase in the driveway. It was a powerful image perfectly curated to elicit sympathy, and it was working. The comments section was a river of vitriol directed squarely at me. People who did not know me, people who had never worked a day in finance, people who had never paid a mortgage were calling for my head. There were thousands of comments, Monster One user wrote. Imagine having that much money and letting your son sleep on the floor. Another wrote, this is why we need to tax the rich. They are sociopaths. Dox him. Find out where he lives. Let us go protest outside his ivory tower. The narrative was spreading fast. Local blogs picked it up, twisting the story even further. Old man evicts son for Christmas, rich dad, poor son. The headlines were catchy and damning. My phone started ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters or internet vigilantes trying to get a comment or a reaction. I watched the view count tick up 50,000, 100,000. Vanessa was playing the victim card with the skill of a seasoned grifter. She was using the court of public opinion to try and shame me into writing a check. She thought that if she made enough noise, I would pay her to be quiet. To protect my reputation, I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the heat spread through my chest. She had made a critical error. She assumed I cared about the opinions of strangers. She assumed I had shame regarding my actions. But a CFO knows that transparency is the best disinfectant. She had opened the door to the public sphere. She had invited the world into our private financial dispute. And if she wanted the world to see our finances, I was more than happy to oblige. She had showed them the tears I was going to show them, the receipts. I picked up my phone and called Abernathy. Sam, I said, my voice calm amidst the digital storm. Have you seen the video I have? Abernathy replied. He sounded weary. She is defaming you, Doug. We can sue for libel. No, I said, cutting him off. A lawsuit takes years. The court of public opinion moves in minutes. She wants a show, Sam. Let us give her one. Come to the penthouse and bring the projector. We are going live. I did not buy a ring light. I did not use a filter, and I certainly did not cry. I simply set up a high-definition projector in my living room, connected my laptop, and pointed the lens at the white wall behind me. Abernathy sat off to the side, holding a stack of notarized affidavits, his face stoic, ready to provide legal context if necessary. The view count on Vanessa's video had climbed to 500,000, and the internet mob was currently doxing my old address, threatening to burn down a rental property I hadn't visited in weeks. It was time to introduce a little thing called forensic accounting to the court of public opinion. I pressed the live button on my phone. The screen immediately flooded with angry emojis and hateful comments. People were calling me a tyrant, a hoarder, and worse, telling me to rot in hell for evicting my own grandchildren, even though none existed yet. I watched the hate scroll by for a full minute, letting the audience vent, letting them think they had the moral high ground. Then I looked into the camera lens with the same expression I used when firing an embezzler. Good evening, I said, my voice steady and clear. My name is Douglas Prentice. I am the monster you have been hearing about. I am the man who supposedly ruined his son's life for no reason. But before you light your torches, I would like to show you exactly what I have been paying for, while my son and his wife were ostensibly struggling to survive. I clicked the remote in my hand. The projector hummed to life, beaming a massive spreadsheet onto the wall behind me. It was a consolidated statement of my bank transfers to Brandon and Vanessa over the last 12 months. The numbers were stark black on white, undeniable. Vanessa claims I abandoned them, I said, pointing to the first column. She claims they were living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. Let us look at the expenditures for the month of November. Specifically, the week she claimed they could not afford to fix their own furnace. I highlighted a series of transactions. The text on the wall was large enough for even the viewers on small screens to read clearly. November 3rd, the spa at the Mandarin Oriental. $350 for a facial and massage. November 5th, Nordstrom, personal shopper. $2,100 for a handbag. November 7th. The French Laundry, dinner for four, $1,800. I turned back to the camera. The comments section had slowed down. The insults were being replaced by question marks. "This is not the spending of a struggling family," I said, my voice hardening. "This is the spending of a parasite." Vanessa claimed she was saving for a future family. In reality, she was burning through my money on luxuries while I paid the electric bill she felt was beneath her notice. I clicked the remote again, bringing up a new slide. This one was dedicated to Brandon. My son claims he works hard. He claims he is a victim of the economy. Let us look at his work schedule. The screen showed a log of credit card charges, cross-referenced with timestamps from a golf course booking system. Every Friday for the last year, Brandon has charged greens fees at the Rolling Hills Country Club. That is $200 a round, plus cart, plus drinks, plus lunch at the clubhouse. While he was telling me he was working late to earn a promotion, he was actually playing 18 holes on my dime. That is $10,000 a year spent on a game while he let his own father pay his property taxes. I saw the tide beginning to turn in the comments section. A few users were starting to type things like, "Wait, is this real? And she spent $2,000 on a bag while begging for rent." But I was not done. The pièce de résistance was the Carter family. I clicked the remote one more time, pulling up a series of receipts from a local tobacconist and a high-end liquor store. "And let us not forget the poor-in-laws," I said, the sarcasm dripping from my voice. "The people who, Vanessa claims, I insulted. The people who just wanted a humble Christmas with family. Here are the charges from the supplementary credit card I gave Brandon for emergencies." I pointed to the wall, December 16th, the day after I was uninvited. The charges appeared in red Cuban cigars, imported specifically for Mr. Ted Carter. $400, single malt scotch, 3 bottles, $600. A new set of titanium golf clubs charged 2 days before Christmas. $1,200. I walked closer to the camera, letting my face fill the frame. This man, Ted Carter, is currently living in my house, hiding from bankruptcy fraud in Florida. He is drinking my wine, smoking cigars bought with my money, and sleeping in a bed I paid for. And he has the audacity to complain that the pool is not heated. The internet mob is a fickle beast. It thrives on outrage, but it hates a hypocrite more than anything. The comments section, which had been a river of hate 5 minutes ago, suddenly reversed its flow. The flood of support was instantaneous and overwhelming. "Receipts," someone typed in all caps. He brought the receipts. She played us another rote. "Look at those numbers. That is more than I make in a month." "King behavior," a third user commented. "Cut them off." "Doug, let them starve." I took a breath, feeling the adrenaline of the moment. It was not joy, it was vindication. I was not trying to win a popularity contest. I was trying to clear my name. "I did not evict my son because I am cruel," I said. Looking directly into the lens, I stopped paying his bills because he stopped respecting the man who paid them. I cut him off because he decided that appearances were more important than loyalty. He chose to lease a Range Rover to impress a fraudster instead of paying his own mortgage. He chose to humiliate me to please a wife who sees me as an ATM. I signaled Abernathy, who handed me the final document. It was the foreclosure notice. "They are not homeless because of me," I said, holding the paper up to the camera. "They are homeless because they tried to sell a house they did not own to pocket equity that did not exist. They tried to defraud me, and when that failed, they tried to destroy my reputation. Well, here is the truth. They are broke not because of the economy, but because they are greedy entitlement addicts. And I am the rehab facility, and the doors are now closed." I ended the stream without saying goodbye. The screen went black, but I knew the fire I had started was just beginning to burn across the internet. Vanessa had wanted to be famous. She had wanted attention. She had wanted the world to see her plight. Well, she got her wish. The world saw her all right. They saw her math, they saw her lies, and most importantly, they saw the price tag on her handbag. Abernathy let out a low whistle, clapping his hands slowly. "Remind me never to cross you, Doug," he said. That was not a press conference, that was an execution. I sat down in my chair, feeling the exhaustion wash over me. It was done, the public was on my side, but the war was not over yet. There was one more loose end, one more secret that needed to be exposed to ensure they could never climb back out of the hole they had dug. I looked at the security monitor on my desk, showing the live feed from the hidden cameras inside the Oak Street house. The cameras I had installed years ago for security and had never checked until today. "Get the police on the line, Sam," I said, watching the screen where Ted Carter was currently pacing the living room, throwing a vase against the wall in a fit of rage. "I think it is time we let the Florida authorities know exactly where their fugitive is hiding. And while we are at it, let us play the audio from last night. I want the world to hear exactly what they planned to do to me." The numbers on the spreadsheet were damning enough to destroy their reputation. But I had one final card to play, a card that would shift the narrative from financial irresponsibility to criminal conspiracy. I looked into the camera lens, my face filling the screens of hundreds of thousands of viewers who were now glued to the drama, unfolding in real time. You might be asking yourselves why I am being so harsh. I said, my voice low and grave. You might think cutting off financial support is punishment enough for ungratefulness, and you would be right, if this were just about money. But it is not about money, it is about survival. I clicked the mouse on my laptop, opening a file named Living Room Camera, December 24th. It was a recording from the security system I had installed inside the Oak Street house 3 years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I had never checked the feed, I respected their privacy. But after the uninviting call, I had a suspicion that the conversation didn't end when I hung up. "I am going to play you an audio clip from Christmas Eve," I said. "This is the conversation that took place between Ted Carter and his wife Linda while my son was out buying last-minute gifts and Vanessa was at the spa using my credit card." I pressed play. The audio was crisp and clear, picked up by the high fidelity microphone hidden in the smoke detector. Ted's voice boomed through the speakers, slurring slightly from the scotch I paid for. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Linda, the old man is still lucid. If he figures out about the Florida indictment, he will cut the purse strings. We cannot afford that." Linda's voice was sharper, anxious. "What do you want to do, Ted? We cannot just make him disappear." Ted laughed, a dark, ugly sound. "We do not need him to disappear. We just need him to be managed. I have a friend in the city, a doctor who owes me a favor. We can make a case for early onset dementia. He is 72, Alinda. He lives alone, he forgets things. We get him declared incompetent. We get Brandon assigned as his legal guardian. And then we control the trust. Once we have power of attorney, we can liquidate the portfolio and move the assets offshore before the feds catch up to me. We put him in a nice facility, one of those places where they keep them sedated, and we live out our golden years in peace." Paused the recording. The silence in my penthouse was absolute. Even Abernathy looked pale. The internet chat room, which had been moving at a blur, froze for a second, before exploding in a new wave of horror. They were not just mooching, they were plotting to lock me away. They were planning to steal my freedom, to medicate me into oblivion, just to access the wealth I had built. I looked back at the camera. They wanted to put me in a home. I said, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. They wanted to take my mind and my life, just to fund their fugitive lifestyle. This is the man my son chose over me. This is the man sleeping in my guest room right now. I switched the feed on the screen from the recorded clip to the live camera view of the Oak Street living room. It was a real-time broadcast. The room was dark, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains. Ted Carter was sitting on the sofa, nursing a drink, still fuming about the internet being cut. He had no idea the salsa world was watching him. He had no idea his voice had just condemned him. Then the room suddenly washed in blue and red light. It started silently flashing against the walls, strobing like a disco ball in hell. Ted stood up, confused, walking toward the window, pushing back the curtain. Outside, the driveway was filled with police cruisers. There were not just local cops. There were federal agents, U.S. Marshals enforcing an interstate warrant. I watched on the screen as the front door flew open, splintering inward under the force of a battering ram. Ted stumbled back, dropping his glass. It shattered on the floor, a mirror of his shattered schemes. Police officers in tactical gear swarmed the room, rifles raised, shouting commands that were muffled by the microphone but clear in their intent. "Get on the ground! Get on the ground!" Now, Ted Carter, the man who thought he was untouchable, the man who planned to steal my life, raised his hands, shaking violently. He dropped to his knees, right there on the rug I had bought for Brandon's 30th birthday. An officer kicked his legs apart and zip-tied his hands behind his back. Vanessa ran into the room, screaming, wearing a silk robe she surely hadn't paid for. She tried to pull the officers off her father, but she was shoved aside, her protests drowned out by the reading of rights. Brandon appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at the chaos, with the face of a man waking up from a coma to find the world on fire. I leaned into the microphone, speaking to my audience and to my son, who I knew was not watching, but would soon feel the aftershocks. That is the United States Marshals Service executing a warrant for Theodore Carter for wire fraud, embezzlement, and flight to avoid prosecution. I called them this morning. I gave them the address because, unlike my son, I do not harbor criminals, I expose them. On the screen, Ted was hauled up and marched out the door, his head hanging low. Linda was sitting on the sofa, sobbing into her hands while an officer asked her for identification. Vanessa was screaming at Brandon, hitting his chest, blaming him for not stopping the federal government. I watched for a moment longer, feeling the final thread of attachment snap. This was the end of the line. The house was lost, the money was gone. The criminal was in custody, and my son was left standing in the wreckage of a life he had built on lies. I turned off the stream, cutting the feed to the millions of witnesses. I looked at Abernathy. "It is done," I said. Abernathy nodded, closing his laptop. "You saved yourself." "Doug, that was self-defense." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the city lights. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound exhaustion. I had won. The victory was total, but as I looked down at the street 30 floors below, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come tomorrow. I would have to wake up and live the rest of my life knowing that my own child had been willing to sell me out for a man in handcuffs. The silence that followed the departure of the federal agents was short-lived because financial institutions do not like uncertainty, and nothing screams risk like a federal raid on a foreclosed property. First National Bank moved with a speed that would have impressed me in my prime. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the sheriff deputies were back, but this time they were not looking for a fugitive. They were looking for the keys. The bank had exercised the emergency preservation clause in the mortgage contract, citing the criminal activity and the abandonment of financial responsibility. The house was no longer a home. It was a distressed asset, and banks protect their assets, so did not go to the house to watch this part. I did not need to see it to know exactly what it looked like. Julian, my investigator, sent me the final video file from across the street. It was a scene of absolute reduction. The sheriff gave them 20 minutes to gather personal essentials, arguing that anything else was part of the estate being seized to cover the massive debts. Brandon came out first. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn during the closing fiasco, rumpled and stained. He was carrying 2 black plastic garbage bags slung over his shoulder, like Santa Claus in reverse. Inside those bags were not gifts, but the sum total of his 32 years on Earth. A few suits, some shoes, and the toiletries he could sweep into a pile. He stopped on the sidewalk, looking back at the house, looking at the windows where he used to stand and drink his coffee while I paid for the heat. He looked small, broken, and for the first time completely aware of his own insignificance. Vanessa followed him. She was not screaming anymore. She was in a state of catatonic shock. She dragged a single Louis Vuitton suitcase, the wheels clattering loudly on the pavement behind her. It was the only piece of luggage the deputies allowed her to take. A final remnant of the fake life she had constructed. She was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes, but there was no hiding the slump of her shoulders or the way she flinched when the locksmith began drilling into the front door to change the cylinders. They stood there on the curb next to the overflowing trash cans, shivering in the winter wind. The Range Rover was gone, repossessed in the middle of the night by the leasing agency after I alerted them to the insolvency of the lessee. Linda Carter sat on her own suitcase a few feet away, weeping softly, holding a birdcage with a terrified parakeet inside. The grandeur was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a family of 4, reduced to 3, standing on a public street with nowhere to go and no one to call. The sheriff placed a neon orange sticker on the front door, sealing the property. He said something to Brandon, pointing down the street, essentially telling them to move along. They were loitering. Brandon nodded slowly. He picked up his plastic bags, his hands red from the cold, and began to walk. He did not know where he was going. He just knew he could not stay there. I watched the video feed terminate as they rounded the corner, disappearing from the frame. They were not just homeless. They were exiles cast out from the kingdom of my protection into the wilderness of the real world. And as I closed the laptop, I knew that the house would be sold, the debts would be settled. But the lesson they were learning on that cold pavement was something that no amount of money could ever buy. They were finally feeling the weight of their own lives, and it was crushing them. 6 months is a long time in the world of finance. It is 2 quarters of earnings reports. It is enough time for a market correction, and it is certainly enough time for a man to reinvent himself. But in the life of a father, 6 months of silence feels like a lifetime. I sat on a bench in Central Park watching the early summer sun filter through the leaves, creating dappled patterns on the pavement. My suitcase was next to me, packed for a flight to Tokyo that left in 4 hours. Was not waiting for anyone, or at least I told myself I wasn't. But when I saw the figure approaching from the south path, I knew I had been lying to myself. He was wearing a brown delivery uniform, the name of a logistics company stitched over the pocket. He looked thinner, the soft edges of his face, the result of too many expensive dinners and too much premium scotch, had been chiseled away by the hard reality of manual labor. He walked differently, too. Gone was the arrogant strut of a man who thought he owned the sidewalk, replaced by the efficient, tired stride of a man who is paid by the package. "Hello, Dad," Brandon said, stopping a few feet away. He didn't sit down. He stood there holding his cap in his hands, his knuckles raw and red. "Hello, Brandon," I said. I gestured to the empty space on the bench. "You can sit." "You are not on the clock, are you?" He hesitated, then sat on the far edge, leaving a respectful distance between us. "No. I am on my lunch break. I saw on social media that you were selling the penthouse. I figured you might be here. You always come here before you travel." I looked at him closely. For the first time in years, I did not see a reflection of my wallet. I saw my son. He looked tired. He looked beaten. But he also looked real. "Vanessa left," he said, staring at his work boots. "She went back to Florida with her parents the day the eviction notice came for the apartment we rented. She said she couldn't live with a failure. She took the dog." I nodded slowly. It was expected. Parasites do not stick around when the host body stops providing nourishment. "I am sorry to hear that," I said. And I meant it, not because I liked her, but because I knew it hurt him. "I deserved it," Brandon said quietly. He looked up at me, his eyes clear, terrifyingly sober. "I deserved all of it, Dad. The foreclosure, the humiliation, the internet hating me. You were right about everything. I was weak, I was greedy, and I was ungrateful. I thought I was a big man because I spent your money. I didn't know what being a man was, until I had to carry 50-pound boxes up 3 flights of stairs just to eat. I looked at his hands. They were calloused, rough, scarred. It was the first time I had ever seen his hands look like they had done an honest day's work. I am working hard, Dad, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. I am paying off my debts slowly. I am living in a studio apartment in Queens. It is not much, but it is mine. I pay the rent. That is good, Brandon, I said. I am proud of you. He flinched as if I had slapped him. That is the first time you have said that. In 5 years, he whispered. He took a deep breath, turning to face me fully. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask, I know. I burned the bridge and salted the earth. But I am drowning out here. I am lonely, and I miss my family. Can I come home? I do not want your money. I do not want an allowance. I just want to come home. I want to be your son again. I looked at the park around us, at the families walking by, at the fathers holding their children as hands. It would be so easy to say yes. It would be so easy to write a check to buy him a condo to fix his life again. But I knew that if I did that, I would destroy the progress he had made. I would be stealing his redemption. I cannot take you back. Brandon, I said, my voice gentle but firm. The penthouse is sold. I am leaving the country in a few hours. I am going to see the world, something I should have done 20 years ago. Brandon's shoulders slumped. The light in his eyes flickered out. I understand, he said, standing up. I guess I will just keep going. Wait, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. It was not for a bank. It was for a non-profit organization. I handed it to him. Do you recognize the address? He looked at the card. 24 Oak Street, he read. His eyes went wide. That is the house. That is my house. It was your house, I corrected. It is now the Beatrice Prentice Home for Children. I bought it back from the bank at the foreclosure auction. I renovated it. It opens next week. It is a sanctuary for orphans, children who have no family, children who need protection. Brandon stared at the card, his hands shaking. You bought it back. You named it after Mom. I did, I said. And I happen to know they are looking for a head of security, a night watchman. It does not pay much. It is barely above minimum wage, but it comes with a small room in the basement, a place to sleep. And it comes with a purpose. You would be protecting children who have nothing. You would be keeping them safe, something you failed to do for your own family. Brandon looked at the card, then at me. Tears were streaming down his face, openly now. You want me to work as a security guard in the house where I used to throw parties? He asked. I want you to build something real, I said. I want you to walk those halls at night and remember what you lost, and I want you to use that pain to protect those children. If you can do that for a year, if you can prove to me that you understand the meaning of service and sacrifice, then maybe, when I get back, we can have dinner. Brandon wiped his face with his sleeve. He gripped the card tightly, as if it were a lifeline. I will apply today, he said. I will not let you down, Dad. Not this time. I stood up and picked up my suitcase. I know you won't, I said. I extended my hand. He looked at it for a second, then took it. His grip was strong, rough, real. We shook hands, not as financier and dependent, but as two men. Goodbye. Brandon, I said. Goodbye, Dad, he replied. I turned and walked away toward the avenue where a town car was waiting. I did not look back. I knew he was watching me, but I also knew he had a bus to catch. He had boxes to deliver. He had a life to earn. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about him. The flight attendant took my boarding pass and smiled. Welcome aboard. Mr. Prentice, you are in seat 1. A thank you, I said, walking down the jet bridge, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the metal. The plane was massive, a silver bird. ready to take me to the other side of the world. I settled into the wide leather seat, accepting a glass of champagne from the stewardess. As the plane taxied down the runway, I looked out the window at the sprawling city falling away beneath me. I could see the grid of streets, the tiny cars, the millions of lives being lived in the canyons of steel somewhere down there. In a small room in Queens, my son was probably eating a sandwich, preparing for his shift. Somewhere in Florida, Vanessa was likely complaining to her mother about the humidity. I took a sip of the champagne. The engines roared to life, pressing me back into the seat. For 45 years, I had been afraid of being alone. I had bought affection. I had subsidized loyalty. I had tolerated disrespect because I thought the alternative was silence. But as the plane lifted off, breaking through the cloud layer, into the brilliant, blinding sunlight above, I realized the truth. Loneliness is not sitting in an empty room. Loneliness is sitting in a crowded room with people who only love you for what you can give them. I was alone in the sky, thousands of miles from the life I had known, and I had never felt more complete. The noise was gone. The leeches were gone. The weight was gone. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of bank statements. I just flew. The most expensive thing I ever financed wasn't a penthouse or a portfolio. It was the illusion of my son's love. For 45 years, I confused being needed with being wanted. I thought my checkbook was a bridge connecting us, but it was actually a barrier preventing him from becoming a man. True wealth isn't measured in assets, but in the freedom to walk away from those who view you as a resource rather than a person. I learned that you cannot subsidize respect. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is close the wallet and let their child finally feel the necessary weight of their own life. If you believe respect should never have a price tag, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories where justice is the ultimate currency.